Friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Oh, we have quite a few things to discuss. Some things around us concerning our environment are continuing to change. Those of you who live in the States, we've been having some crippling weather patterns this winter. Although we have seen worse, what's happening is quite significant. They have names for these things like El Nino, but it doesn't really matter what they call it. It only matters that you understand what is happening when you look at the data with your own two eyes. Up in the Arctic, there's what's called a polar vortex. This is a large, cold, circulating, low-pressure air mass that is almost always at the poles. The reason the poles are ice-capped is, of course, due to the sun's radiation exposure along with air and water currents. This low-pressure system keeps the cold air up there where it belongs for the most part, but sometimes this vortex can weaken. When this vortex is weakened, it can affect the jet stream, pushing it southward. Now, how does it do that? The jet stream is a fast-flowing current of air up close to the Troposphere, flowing from west to east. The high-pressure system wants to move in up there, right? Pushing the low pressure system south, causing the flow of the jet stream to also move south. So what you end up with is this roller coaster like pattern. Now, when that happens, all that cold air is forced southward, fast, creating high speed winds where these two systems meet. And that's what we've seen so far this winter. But we are moving out of this season, and now we have greater challenges ahead of us. And one of them is going to be the heat. Now, they can see weather like this coming from a mile away, but there are other things happening around us that add to this being something more than just freak weather patterns. This will continue on a global scale, folks. Our atmosphere is going through some things that I want to talk about because I want to show you what you may have been missing.
An electric storm moving across Southern California caused all kinds of problems Tuesday night. For a brief period, even Los Angeles International Airport was without power. Jim Murray with more on the havoc caused by Mother Nature.
A downpour in Peakhurst has been the entree to an afternoon of wild weather. There was flash flooding in and around Bexley and Riverwood before the rain turned to hail. The Weather Bureau's official report was just as alarming, with not just large but giant hailstones. Thankfully, though, residents in the strike zone report only golf ball-sized chunks of ice.
Now, Mexican volcano has unleashed a powerful explosion, sending a column of ash 4,000 feet into the air. Over the past few weeks, the volcano has become more active, prompting the authorities there to create a 7-mile exclusion zone. Incredible.
So let me see if I can explain what is happening and what we are facing here. Right now, the Earth is receiving ongoing influxes of galactic cosmic rays, space radiation. Some coming off of the sun and some coming from another source, okay? These particles are across the electromagnetic spectrum, and there are some that they label exotic because they really don't know what they are. And not only is the Earth receiving these particles, but Mars, the Moon, the Sun, and other bodies in our solar system are being hit with these particles as well. But aside from the other planets, we understand that we have the layers of our atmosphere and the magnetosphere to shield us from these particles. Now, because there is an excess of these particles coming in, more of this radiation is of course being redirected by the magnetosphere into the Earth through the poles. And what this is doing is causing a buildup inside the Earth. And these highly charged particles not only affect the magma inside the Earth, but the water inside the Earth as well. As this buildup of charged particles entering the Earth continues, the gases in the Earth, pressure systems in the Earth change. There are temperature changes, and the planet will need to release some of that energy through venting, mainly volcanism, steam vents, earthquakes, sinkholes, at a quantity and level that we have never seen before. Because the purging the Earth has done thus far is simply not enough.
The impact this massive sinkhole left
It's a pretty big hole.
is bringing concerns for people living just feet away.
And I'm thinking, oh my God.
Engineers now assessing the damage to figure out what brought on this football field-sized crater.
We begin with breaking news for you after a historic amount of rainfall that has caused flooding and landslides. The hits just keep on coming. Now there's a huge sinkhole to contend with in the Halls area.
As you mentioned, that historic rainfall, water has been flowing through the bottom of this area underground, and that is essentially what creates a sinkhole. This is much different from what residents saw when they first reported it.
So what we have to do is talk about what's going on with our atmosphere, because everything that is living here is already in balance with the way the atmosphere is or has been. When the pressure and composition of the atmosphere changes, this forces life on the planet to adapt to these alterations, to change or mutate. And the problem with that is, for humans, and I know for many animals, it can be quite an uncomfortable process. For one, the chemical composition of our atmosphere. Many people forget that we don't just breathe oxygen. In fact, we breathe in about 7-8% nitrogen, about 20% oxygen, some argon and carbon dioxide with a little water vapor, and there are traces of other things in there like neon, methane, helium, krypton, hydrogen, of course, some traces of ammonia and iodine. So if the air we breathe changes composition, and it doesn't have to change much, that is out of balance of what your body normally takes in. I'm sure most of you know how it feels and how hard it is to breathe when you're in conditions that alter the air. Think about a hot, humid day and how much easier it is to breathe once you enter an air-conditioned or cooler environment. Now, this is not something we should fear. It is something that I believe should be a priority when it comes to understanding our planet. That lack of understanding is, after all, what causes fear. When the Earth does something people didn't expect. By the way, make no mistake, this is not a conspiracy theory. Nothing that I am going to say is classified. It is simply science that any one of you can look into. They tell you what's happening, but you see, they know how to manipulate you into seeing one thing or the other, and that is how they hide the truth. They have you looking in the opposite direction most of the time, and so most people are not going to follow this. They are going to be so distracted that they will miss certain events, and I have to tell you, having that many people oblivious to what's going on is a dangerous thing. One of the ways to find out what's happening is to see where money is being spent, to monitor space, to monitor certain volcanoes, the oceans. They like to lay the science down on the table without telling you what it means. The only thing you'll get out of them is an explanation after an event to explain it away. You will also never see them connect one event to another, and I'm talking about natural phenomena. The funny thing is, you're going to find that many people will hear information like this. They will even come to some understanding, and they will be passive about it. Because honestly, people have other things to do, and responsibilities and careers. They own things, and they also enjoy the world that is around them. And so they hear things like this, and if it's not in their own backyard, they become passive about what has taken place. The difference now is, soon, more and more people are not going to be able to ignore what's happening because they are going to feel it. They won't know it's wrong at first, but they will start to see things in their own backyards. And that is what we all need to be mentally prepared for. Listen, they know what is going to happen with this planet, the the sun, and the moon. And they are going to start telling you all these things to explain what's happening. But they are not going to give you the truth. You know, back in October of 2017, we had that space object Oumuamua fly by us. But you know, we also had several near misses around that time, not to mention changes in space policy. Let's not forget Trump signing a Space Policy Directive 1 in December 2017 to give NASA a boost in funding, but not to focus on going to an asteroid like NASA wanted to do, but to focus on going back to the moon and getting to Mars, which was a unanimous recommendation given by the new Space Council at their first meeting in October 2017. It's almost as if they saw what was happening in space, and so this became top priority. Let me tell you, they are in a frenzy to find answers, and they are desperate to save their own hides. But they're not going to tell you what's happening. So let's talk about the atmosphere, starting with the layers. So we have the first layer, the lowest layer, the troposphere. It starts from the surface of the Earth at sea level up to about 10 kilometers or a little over 6 miles. Now the height of the troposphere does vary. It is at its highest at the equator and it's at its lowest at the poles. The height also changes with the seasons. The colder it is, the lower it is. The hotter it is, the higher it is, okay? This is the layer of the atmosphere where weather occurs and where you find clouds and the elemental composition of the air we breathe. At the bottom, where we are, is where the air is the warmest, which of course is the reason tall mountains come snow-capped. That is also due to pressure. The pressure drops as you go up. The troposphere also holds most of the water or moisture. Now, right above the troposphere is something like a barrier called the tropopause. This is at the 12-kilometer range, and you're at about negative 55 degrees Celsius. This separates the troposphere from the next layer, the stratosphere. And it is separated because the troposphere transfers heat by convection, which can only be done when the temperature decreases the higher you go. The stratosphere, on the other hand, increases in temperature the higher you go. The stratosphere goes up about another 40 kilometers. Now, what heats up the stratosphere is an oxygen molecule we know to be as ozone. It does this when it absorbs the light energy from the sun, particularly ultraviolet rays, which is why the stratosphere is also known as the ozone layer. Now, because there is very little mixing and convection in this layer, the air is much more stable, which is why commercial aircraft fly in the lower stratosphere. Sometimes there are clouds in this layer. Those are nacreous clouds, and those are formed near the poles. But there is very little moisture in the stratosphere. It's very dry. Now this layer, because of the lack of convection, anything that comes up from the surface, such as the gases of an erupting volcano, those gases tend to stay there, sometimes for months, not to mention everything humans send up when we are talking about chemicals. Keep this in mind. You can only have heat where you have matter. If there is no matter, there is nothing to transfer the heat. For instance, the heat of the sun can't heat anything up if there is no matter to heat up. This is important. By the way, if by chance one wanted to keep the stratosphere from heating up to an alarming level, one might try to use a substance that could possibly reflect incoming light particles, perhaps in an ejected aerosol form from some type of aircraft, maybe. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. So at the top of the stratosphere at about 50 kilometers, we have the stratopause, another barrier to separate the stratosphere from the mesosphere, which goes up another 30 kilometers. And the temperature there starts to decrease with height again, down to about negative 90 degrees Celsius. Now, believe it or not, the mesosphere is rather still a bit of a mystery, because the satellites above it don't take measurements of that area, and balloons can't reach it. And when they can fly instruments into the mesosphere, it's for a short time and too infrequent. The mesosphere is the layer where meteors burn up. Now, why does that happen? Well, when you have something in space traveling incredibly fast, it doesn't use much energy because it's in the vacuum of space. But once it hits air at that speed, it creates this wall of heat created by friction. And we're talking up to around 1600 degrees Celsius or 3000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, something like the space shuttle, they use shielding and silica for re-entry, and it's not coming in as fast as a meteor. And this is the reason it doesn't burn up on re-entry. So at the top of the mesosphere, we have the mesopause, and then the thermosphere. These two layers make up the ionosphere, okay? At the top of the thermosphere, that's about 90 kilometers or 56 miles, this is space shuttle and ISS territory. The air density is very low, and the temperature of the thermosphere is directly affected by the sun, and it varies as it absorbs a lot of the X-rays and UV rays. When the sun is very active, the thermosphere expands, and you could find the top of the thermosphere anywhere between 500 and 1,000 kilometers or higher. After that, at the thermal pause or exosphere, you are considered to be officially in outer space. Now, there are gases in the thermosphere. When high energy photons hit the thermosphere, they strip away electrons from those gases, creating charged ions in this layer, creating the ionosphere. And this is where auroras occur, okay? Finally, although this is not an atmospheric layer outside the exosphere, there is the magnetosphere. Again, we have further interaction with incoming charged particles as it steers these particles into the poles. If the thermosphere gets really charged up, and I mean really electrically charged up, then what you get is heat. How much heat? Well, what if I told you it could get well over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit? And once you get into those type of temperatures, the thermosphere has become something different. Most people don't know that the atmospheric layers have tides and waves, just like the oceans. Did you know this? It keeps the circulation going between these layers. Now, do we really need the circulation of 4,000 plus degree temperatures? Are you beginning to see where I'm going with this? Why I am explaining this to you all in this manner?
So I started promoting a bill, the Weather Research and Forecasting Innovation Act, which actually started in 2013, passed in 2017, if you can imagine. That's how hard it is to pass bills in the House and the Senate and get them signed by the President. So I started working on that bill. Now in the debate, there was a moment where I said these words. I said, temperatures quit rising 10 years ago, but here's what I know. My constituents this year will die in a tornado. Let's allocate resources where we can save lives and property today. Now, of course, after that, and by the way, that 10-year timeline there, I pulled that from the NASA website. But after that pause, it started going up immediately, like the next year, right? And now there's this spike, and then for, the last 2 years, it's gone down a little bit. But here's the point: I don't deny the consensus that the climate is changing. In fact, I fully believe and know that the climate is changing. I also know that we human beings are contributing to it in a major way.
This is not going to have a cooling effect. If it were just the sun acting up, that would be different. So how can I put this lightly? It's going to get very warm, very toasty. Let me tell you what's happening. There is a reason we have been finding and tracking all these objects in space. Asteroids, comets, things of that nature. And as you may very well know, they have been finding a lot lately that have come very close. And what they do not emphasize to the public is that we are entering into a part of space that has a lot of junk in it. It's quite dense and very dusty. Now we have all this matter hitting the thermosphere, and it's creating a greater amount of heat transfer, thus heating up the thermosphere, charging the ionosphere, and it's going to continue. That, along with galactic cosmic rays entering the Earth, we are going to be hit with heat coming from above and below. And you will see this. Parts of the Earth will dry up and lose vegetation. And you may expect to see some very different weather this year. So different, they're going to come up with some crazy names to describe this incoming weather. Think about this. For the last few years, we've been having these blood moons, right? Well, who ever heard of a super blood wolf moon? Blood moons used to be rare, right? But now that they occur more often, they give these extra blood moons a different name to give the impression that they are normal occurrences that they have always known about. So that when you hear that another blood moon is coming and you're thinking, but wait, we just had a blood moon not too long ago. Oh, but it's not just a blood moon, it's a Super Saiyan blood moon. Oh, and people buy it, hook, line, and sinker, every time. What if I told you that we would be getting hurricanes forming on land? Huh? What? Yeah. All you need is a lot of water and wind, right? How about winds over 100 miles per hour during a heavy thunderstorm? Not cyclone winds, straight winds. I can't wait to see what they're going to call that. Folks, there is going to come a day soon that when people see dark clouds in the distance, that is going to start to make people feel very uncomfortable, because they will know what's coming with those dark clouds. Flash flooding and wind damage, not to mention the increased threat of lightning and hail. More and more people are going to start witnessing and video recording things that will blow people's minds, and governments, they are preparing for that. All these changes you see happening with social media, they're going to do their absolute best to filter content showing you what's happening around the world, especially before they've had a chance to come up with some BS to explain the events away. And they will try and distract you all with their own fabricated man-made events until they can no longer hide the truth.
The historic Midwest floods are getting worse a week after that disaster started to unfold. A new levee breach yesterday on the Missouri River forced the evacuation of the entire town of Craig, Missouri, in just hours. Officials now estimate the cost of the flooding in 4 states to be in the billions of dollars.
But see, we don't have to take their word for it. You understanding space, understanding our atmosphere, understanding volcanism and weather patterns, understanding magma flow and magnetism, understanding how the jet stream works, how hail forms. These are things we know that we can study, and not just on the internet. They still do have books on these subjects. And doing this is going to give you knowledge of these events despite what the media tells you. You will know why the sky is changing color. You will know why every time it rains, it brings an ocean of water with it. You'll understand and know why when hail the size of cantaloupes fall from the sky. You'll understand why parts of the earth will be on fire and others soaked in water. You see, people don't know the extent of this. Take the wildlife, for example. How many of you know about anthrax? Well, it is quite contagious and can infect the wildlife that some people eat. Now, what's happening now is that there are areas around the world that have been frozen in ice or permafrost for a very long time, thousands of years. And now that these places are melting, the soil is releasing things that have not been seen since those times. It seeps into the water, then the vegetation, then it gets into the wildlife, and finally us. This has already happened. In the Siberian tundra, a young boy died and 20 others hospitalized because they were infected with anthrax from one of the hundreds of infected deer that were grazing nearby the defrosted area. This is something we must consider. Only God knows what's been laying dormant all these years under that ice. Think about what's happening in Antarctica. The release of iron and who knows what else into the water due to the ice melting. So getting back to the atmosphere. Now, I wasn't going to get into it here, but I think it's important for you all to know something regarding chemtrails. Yes, I understand that there are those who have been convinced that what people are seeing is nothing more than water vapor. Okay, I get it. And there are those who believe that they are trying to poison us, population control. There are those who believe that these chemtrails are sprayed in the sky to block out the sun, maybe even perhaps to hide something like Nibiru or Planet X from us. And I have to say, I've always believed that those trails were much more than just water vapor. I was convinced that these were chemicals being sprayed in the sky like many people. I mean, these things are easily seen in the sky above many cities. You can almost clock the times of day when you can expect to see them. So I thought about this and I said to myself, if the chemical composition of those aerosols are what people say they are, then it's kind of a strange way to poison someone. I know those chemicals wouldn't make their way down to us, which is bad. So then I thought, what if this is an attempt to block out the sun? But not to block our view of it, but to block it or reflect the sun's energy. So I went on thinking, even if you wanted to keep the thermosphere from overheating, the sun hasn't really been an issue. Why start blocking it out now? Well, I guess if you have the sun's energy plus galactic cosmic rays coming in, that mixed with the debris and dust floating around the part of space we are entering into, and the leftover spacecraft junk we have floating around up there in the upper atmosphere, listen, they are letting you know what they are doing. You have to keep your eyes open. Let me show you what I mean. Now, I don't know if you've heard, but Harvard scientists will soon send chemicals into the atmosphere to test whether a last-ditch planet-hacking plan could keep Earth habitable. Look at this headline. Harvard scientists, okay, they're not idiots, will soon send chemicals into the atmosphere to test whether a last-ditch, you mean last minute, planet-hacking plan could keep Earth habitable. What? You mean you think it's not going to be habitable? Yes, this was published by a Northwest University Science and Innovation intern. An article published on Business Insider. And I couldn't believe what I was reading. To reverse rising temperatures and prevent catastrophic climate change, some scientists are turning to solar geoengineering, or the modification of Earth's atmosphere using tools like reflective aerosols, mirrors in the atmosphere, and controlled cloud formations. A team of scientists at Harvard University is on track to become the first to test geoengineering methods outside the laboratory. As early as spring 2019, the team will launch an outdoor sky modifying experiment in the United States, spraying particles into a small part of the sky to help reflect some of the sun's rays back into space. I'm sorry, you can't make this stuff up. Their project, the $3 million Stratospheric Controlled Perturbation Experiment, SCOPEX, will send 2 balloons into the stratosphere, which stretches from 6 to 31 miles above Earth's surface. The first balloons will be filled with ice to make sure the instruments work properly. Later ones will include calcium carbonate, which is chalk. I mean, we need calcium in our bodies, and they do use calcium carbonate as an antacid and other medications, but this is not a bioavailable form of calcium, and over time, it's just not good for you. So the article goes on to state how the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change the IPCC, already held a press conference discussing this very idea. The article goes on to state that in late November, researchers at Harvard and Yale published their findings about the potential cost of implementing solar geoengineering methods. The researchers found that the most cost-effective way of releasing sulfate particles into the stratosphere would be by using a high-altitude aircraft. Such a program would cost about $2 billion per year for the first 15 years of use, according to the study published in Environmental Research Letters. Now, I won't spoil the rest of it for you. This is an easy article to find. Calcium carbonate, yeah. How many of you believe that this is going to work after hearing about the layers of our atmosphere? Isn't that like someone admitting to doing something by telling you they are going to do it? Now, how many of you knew about this piece of news before today? And if you did, was your attitude passive? Because I really think that's what they were looking for with this, a passive reaction. They're going to spray the sky with some chemicals or something. What else is new? I know this is what people do. There are other articles, and I'm telling you, do not let this just slip by you. You think human carbon emissions are bad? All the air pollution humans have put out there since the beginning of humans is nothing compared to what some of these volcanoes put out. One volcano eruption puts out enough gases that it can change the temperature of the atmosphere in the course of a day. And these things are spitting out extremely toxic stuff up into the upper atmosphere, mixing with the tides and waves of the atmosphere. If this continues, it will alter our atmosphere to a degree that is very noticeable. Now, folks, I try to take my time with what I do. There is no reason to rush material out for the sake of material. It is important to me that my message is received in the best, most absorbable fashion, because I do want you to absorb this. I want you to go look into these things, think about them. Don't run from them. That would mean that you don't quite understand. Misunderstanding is a strong foundation for fear, and this is a dragon that can only be slayed if we face the dragon. This is our planet. We are Earthlings, and we were given the power to overcome these challenges. Right now, knowledge is something we have to take advantage of, because they are preparing to lie their faces off. And we are going to be put to the test. Then we will see what people truly hold deep in their hearts. But we should feel comfortable knowing that God does not want us to fail. And so we will survive, soldiering forward to a better future.